in our neck of the woods. We are Sports Take, JAKIB Sports YouTube Network. Rob Ellis, Derrick Gunn, and Barrett Brooks. We are joined now by the man who covers the Eagles for the Philadelphia Inquirer. You can follow him on Twitter at EJ Smith94, Mr. EJ Smith, Norristown's finest. What's up, EJ?
You know, I used to have a baseball cap that said that.
Look at you, man. Oh, you're feeling yourself a little bit with that hat.
I was about to say, it was like back in like middle school when I was feeling myself a little bit there.
You should have marketed it, man.
Next appearance, EJ, I need you to dig that baby out of the archive and wear it for your.
I don't know if I still have that one, but yeah, no, that's a deep cut for me right there.
So I don't know if you heard the tail end of our conversation, but it's hard to speculate because you don't know who's going to be here or not with free agency. But we're looking at 10 and 30 and more 10 and 30 really, but and what they may end up doing there. What's your gut telling you, man? Either position or trading down or up or whatever. What's your sense there?
Yeah, I would say the thing I expect the most is that they'll probably trade out of at least one of the picks. I think the trading out of the end of the first round makes a lot of sense. Obviously there's a lot of quarterbacks that are going to be going early in the draft, but if there's a guy that's kind of lingering and, a team wants that fifth-year option, that's always, the Eagles did that with Lamar Jackson with the Ravens, right? Like, they trade out of the first round, the Ravens get the fifth-year option on a quarterback and you can pick up some draft assets. So that's the thing I expect the most. I mean, as far as like what they're going to do at 10, I feel like that's what everybody, really wants to talk about. I mean, if Devin Witherspoon's there, I don't think they can pass up on him. I mean, he's the type of talent, and he's going to, listen, I think a lot of us expect James Bradberry to sign elsewhere in free agencies. I think he's going to get paid a lot of money to play somewhere else. And, the Eagles can't really afford to pay a number 2 cornerback, that much. But if you can get, a guy like Devin Witherspoon, who can be the heir apparent to Darius Slay and, continue that status quo of the secondary where you've got 2 guys, who can match up and, just kind of unlock that secondary the way that it was last year. I don't see them passing on a guy like that. If he's gone, though, I do think that there's that cluster, whether it's Gonzalez or Joey Porter Jr., everybody kind of has their favorites there. If Devin Witherspoon's not there, I could see them going defensive tackle. I know a lot of people talk about edge, but I think they have a bigger need at that 4-eye position. If Fletcher Cox moves on, if Javon Hargrave moves on, all of a sudden you've got Jordan Davis, but you need guys to flank Jordan Davis, athletic guys who can win on the inside. So, it's the Eagles. They're always going to prioritize defensive line, offensive line. Wouldn't surprise me at all to see them go with somebody, at that point in the draft, at 10, who can play on the trenches. But like I said, if you have Devin Witherspoon there, it's almost like don't overthink it. That guy is the best corner in the draft.
At 10?
At 10, yeah.
See, I'm 90% sure that they're gonna move hell or high water to try to get CJ back here. Mm-hmm. But if they lose CJ, you're talking about possibly restructuring 3/4 of your secondary.
Right.
And think about that. Because I think Epps will be cash friendly to this team. But like I said before you came on, I said every year, the first 4 or 5 days of free agency, we see some player we don't even think of getting stupid money.
Yeah.
Who would have thought Christian Kirk was going to get $72 million? I mean,
yeah.
Somebody out there is going to offer CJ some money that maybe the Eagles can't match. I mean, that's a dangerous position to be in. But such is the case because of what they've done. Everybody wants your players when you get to the big show.
Right. Yeah. I mean, once you start winning, everybody starts to see how that player impacts winning. Right. So, yeah, I agree with you. I think that CJ is the biggest priority as far as on field goes. I think that, again, like I wrote earlier this week, like Javon Hargrave counts a lot against the cap. I think they're going to be motivated to re-sign him to kind of be able to manipulate his cap hit a little bit more, renegotiate the deal. But as far as like just on-field impact, CJ Gardner-Johnson, I mean, what he did to the defense is, you can't really argue it. And I like the Eagles have had great safety play for such a long time. And, it really is kind of the staple of like the best Eagles defenses of the last few decades is having a really great versatile safety. And I think we saw that from CJ Gardner-Johnson. And I agree with you. I mean, I think that there's a chance that he might get paid a hefty contract, but I don't know. I mean, he seemed to really enjoy his time here. I don't think he's going to give him a hometown discount or anything like that, but I do think that there's motivation on both sides to keep him here. And I agree with you. I mean, if they can bring CJ Gardner-Johnson back, it makes it so much easier to, even if you do end up with Marcus Epps, going somewhere else, maybe he gets paid more than you think. And then all of a sudden you got Reed Blankenship. I mean, CJ Gardner-Johnson and Reed Blankenship, a lot of teams would be happy with that combo, based off of how Blankenship played. So, corner is definitely the position I'm most intrigued to see. You know, you never know if CJ leaves and Javon Hargrave leaves, maybe they can get Bradbury back. You know, all of a sudden you start to focus that money elsewhere. But no, I'm with you. I think CJ is their top priority as far as an on-field loss if he does leave.
What are the chances they use a franchise tag? The last time they used a franchise tag was what? Not Shady, but D-Jax back in like 2012.
They've only done it 5 times.
Right.
Yeah, it's really hard to see him doing it with this. I mean, with CJ, it's like, I'm not saying he's not a top 5 safety, but paying him that much and all that money goes on this year's cap, you know, it kind of puts you in such an out-leveraged situation where CJ might say, you know, I'll play for, I don't know what the safety
14. It's only 14.4 million.
Yeah, that's a big cap hit for this year, though. So I don't know. I mean, it's hard to see them doing it just because of how much they like to manipulate the cap hits, you know, kind of get it, you know, push it down kick the can down the road. But I mean, at some point, I hear what you're saying about how important he is. Maybe you just don't want him to be able to walk away. But, you know, on the flip side of it, you have to negotiate a contract with him on the other side, and he's got all the leverage at that point. So.
Well, and also, you know, going into the second round, you know, safety, I just told these guys to take a look at. But Trayvon Moehrig from TCU, you can get him in the second round. He can come in and start right now, 6'2", 205, plays lights out, you know. Was you know, beat some really, really good teams this year. You know, what do you think about him?
He's a guy who I actually studied last year. So, like, I'll be honest with you, since the Eagles made it all the way to the Super Bowl, my draft study, I'm still in first-round guys. But I remember looking at Moehrig last year because I thought he was going to come out. And I liked him.
I thought he was too. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people. Honestly, I think he probably would have gone around the same you know, range that he's in now. So, and that's a good point. You know, it's like, if CJ does leave, you're not going to be able to replace what he gave for you, but you can draft a safety. And, you know, you can get good safeties in the second and third round. I mean, especially, you know, we don't know who the DC will be yet, but like if you have a guy with, you know, safety is kind of like pick your flavor. Do you need a box safety? Do you need a free safety? Do you need a guy who can play in the slot? Do you need someone who can, you know, all kinds of different roles that you have for these guys? You know, it's not a one size fits all in the position, and that kind of does hurt their draft value, you know, because not every team is going to be as high on every guy. So if you have a defensive coordinator with a very specific vision for their safeties, and maybe it isn't, you know, I need him to be a CJ Gardner-Johnson who can play all over the field. Yeah, you can get a guy in the second or third round who will start for you. Now, again, he's not going to be the impact player that CJ was. CJ can fit a lot of different schemes and can do a lot of different things, which is why I really think he is the priority. But, yeah, I do think that if he does walk, he can find a starter quality player. I mean, Reed Blankenship played well. He was an undrafted free agent. It's not the hardest position to find young guys to slot in it.
Well, I'm just going to say this and let this scare you. Kayvon Wallace and Reed Blankenship right now are starting.
No.
Come on, that ain't funny, man. That ain't funny, man.
Yeah, I don't need to be scared, by the way. Okay, no, thank you.
Man.
That's a tough one. I mean, I don't know who the next DC will be. You know, if he's like Gannon, then that's a problem because he's gonna have those guys playing like 40 yards back. He's gonna be like, just don't let anybody pass you, right?
Oh man, EJ, I got to ask you the Instagram post from Miles Sanders yesterday. Basically, openly sort of begging, if you will, to come back. Kind of a weird strategy, no? I mean, I got to imagine his agent is like, dude, what's up?
Yeah, that surprised me. I mean, I get that he loves the city, and I mean, what running back wouldn't love playing for the Eagles, right? You know, you play behind one of the best offensive lines in the league, if not the best. You know, it's a scheme that's friendly and everything else. But yeah, I mean, my take on Miles was that I kind of expected him to be a guy that was going to be worth more somewhere else. You know, some team would pay him, you know, accordingly to the fact that he had a career year last year. He's a guy that's flirted with 1,000 yards a couple of times in his career. You know, not the pass catcher that we kind of thought he was going to be after his rookie season, but still he's a valuable running back. And I just think that, you know, he maybe he really is willing to take a discount to stay here, but I don't think his market is going to be a market that the Eagles are competitive in. I mean, there's always a caveat that, like, you know, it's a pretty, like, there are a couple of good running backs at the top of this market. Like, you know, maybe Miles doesn't get what he expected to get. And if he can, you know, sign a 1-year deal for a low cost to come back to the Eagles, I could see that. But yeah, I mean, a long-term deal, the Eagles don't do that. You know, like they come from that Raven school of thought where it's like, you can draft these guys high. You know, you can draft them in the second or third round, even a first-round guy every once in a while, but you don't pay them. You don't give them that second contract because you're not paying, you know, for past production. So yeah, it's hard to see the Eagles being really competitive in his market. Yeah, I was actually like you said, I was surprised that he was lobbying for it.
Miles ain't walking back through that door. His days, his days are done. But staying in the running back theme, what do you think the market value of a Boston Scott is?
Yeah, he's a guy I kind of just expect to stay. I expect him to be able to get something close to the league minimum. I mean, maybe you never know. Like you're right. Like maybe somebody watched him in the playoffs and said that guy can really unlock our backfield. But
he
I
can
think
return.
Yeah, but I just feel like he's one of those guys that like he's been around long enough, and I think that he's worth more to the Eagles than most teams. So I did like my priority list, and I had Boston and who's the other guy I had in that? I had Boston and someone else. I can't. It was Rick Lovato. Boston and Rick Lovato was like two guys that like I'd just be surprised if they were elsewhere. I guess you never say never, but yeah, I think he'll be back. I think you'll have Kenny Gainwell, Boston Scott, and then I think they'll draft somebody. We can talk about we can talk about draft options. I think whether it's at 30 or in the second round, or even if it's a day 3 guy, I think that they'll add somebody to this mix who can kind of take a lot of those carries that Miles Sanders had last year.
All right, so I can't believe we made it this far without asking about the coordinators. We know Vance Joseph's out. We know that. And it's been real quiet on the offensive coordinator front. I guess let's start there. Is this just the Eagles are doing an amazing job keeping this buttoned up, or is it they're just waiting to announce both coordinators and Brian Johnson's got the offensive spot?
That's my take on it, is that they know Brian Johnson's going to be the guy. Now, they do have to, for the Rooney Rule, interview another minority candidate. Obviously, Brian Johnson's a black man. You wouldn't think they'd need to, but they need to, interview somebody from the outside, an external candidate. So they do have to conduct interviews. And I think right now they're just so focused on the DC stuff that they probably haven't even gotten too focused on it yet. So, yeah, I expect Brian Johnson will be the OC. And then from there, I mean, I've been really intrigued by this defensive coordinator search. There's been a lot of, diversity in scheme. There's been 3-4, there's been 4-3, there's been really aggressive coaches like Vance Joseph or Jim Leonard. There's been a lot of different exotic things that you kind of didn't expect to see. I thought that this would be kind of cut and dry, find a Fangio disciple, find somebody who, knows Vic Fangio's scheme and just run with that. But no, they've kind of done the exact opposite. They've really gotten a lot of good ideas. I think it speaks to the organization and the kind of like how they do things. And it's a smart idea. It's like, you can bring these coaches in and get free information on it. What would you do with our players? What would you do, with this scheme? So I think they're doing their due diligence on this. I think it makes a lot of sense to do that. And yeah, I mean, as far as like Vance Joseph, I thought would have been a good hire for them. But I just think that, they still have a lot of good candidates. I really like Sean Desai. I think he makes a lot of sense. Obviously he's got the Temple connection. He seems like a really smart guy. But just like it was with Nick, when they were looking for head coaches, they know who, really blew them away in the interview process. And, that's the guy that I think we'll end up with, is whoever really crushed their interview.
Did they talk to Desai, EJ? I'm sorry, Gunner. Did they talk to Desai? But we've heard
I believe that it's been reported that he interviewed for the job.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Vance Joseph is gone. Lovie Smith is not even on their list of possible candidates, which shocks me. And you talk about Desai being your favorite choice. Would you consider even bringing in a Rex Ryan? We had jokingly said earlier he might be too big for the program. Would you consider him?
That's what I was thinking with Lovey too. It's like, I imagine Nick. Listen, I think that's an organizational decision with these types of things, but you obviously got to give Nick a lot of the say. And I mean, when Nick first got here, I was surprised they didn't have like a former head coach, sort of like a Lovie Smith type, along with him. But I think honestly at this point, I think the Eagles are into the developmental game with these coordinators, guys that can move on to be head coaches. I think that they try to find those more than like, those older guys who kind of have settled into that coordinator job. So, I mean, especially based off of who they've interviewed, it seems like they want to find an up and comer. I think that they like to find those guys who are on the upward trajectory, whether it's right or wrong. I think that that's kind of what their interview pool has kind of suggested. It's a lot of college guys. It's a lot of, defensive backs coaches, or, like just guys who are kind of, again, like moving up through the ranks instead of, coming down necessarily.
I don't see at this point the need to really go elsewhere right now when you have, guys in the organization that they truly do like, Denard Wilson, same conceptually that, just left, and the way things are going on outside that, this organization. I mean, I still think that he is right now the lead as far as, everybody they've interviewed thus far. So, I mean, I think he's more so the leader of the pack right now from the guys they've already interview. You know, what is your sense of Denard Wilson and being that guy? I mean, he's been able to be a great guy to work with the DBs that he has right now. I mean, him and Slay, they go at it, you know, conversations out there, you know, you see they're passionate about how they play. He's not afraid to get in anybody's face. I mean, I think he might be okay.
Yeah, no, he's a really impressive guy. You know, I've had a couple conversations with him over the last couple of years, and I do think that he would be a great DC, and he has those aspirations. He wants to be a head coach in this league. So, you know, I think he makes a lot of sense, and I think I could definitely see in a week or two this being the case where it's like we wanted to get a lot of outside ideas. You know, we wanted to get input, but we knew that Denard was our guy, and now we can bring all those ideas and that input to Denard. You know, we can say, you know, this is what Vance Joseph told us about, you know, what kind of blitz packages he thinks we would be really good at. Or, you know, this is what Jim Leonard taught us about a very exotic scheme that he runs in Wisconsin and some of the ways that it might work in the NFL. You know, with Denard, I think the biggest question I had was that because he's the defensive backs coach, you know, obviously they have Tracy Rocker and Jeremiah Washburn Jr., you know, running the front. I was wondering if they were really hoping to get somebody who knew that 3-4 Fangio style, you know, 5-2, 3-4, whatever you want to call it, that odd front. And if you have Denard Wilson there, does he really know that Fangio front mechanics? But I mean, I think that's something you can figure out. Maybe again, that's something you figured out over the last week or so, interviewing a bunch of different guys. Because I do think that what Denard Wilson can do on the back end, I mean, it's proven. And he's been around a lot of good defensive coaches. You know, Greg Williams, Todd Bowles. You know, he's got really good experience with some DCs, so I'm sure he's got good you know, knowledge of the front seven as well. I haven't spoken to him about it because, you know, I talked to him about DBs, but yeah, I do think that you're right. I think he's definitely in the running for sure, and I think that you know, he might be the guy at the end of all this. And the search was really just more about collecting ideas and taking advantage of the opening to get, you know, like I said, a diverse group of people giving you some perspective on the scheme.
EJ, we've had a lot of debate on the show about Jonathan Gannon. You know, and I've supported him. You know, I didn't think he had a great Super Bowl. Gunner didn't like the lack of aggression, and you know, fans echo that as well. What do you think about him?
Yeah, I mean, I think that his scheme was a frustrating one for fans to watch, especially Eagles fans who are used to a more aggressive scheme. I mean, even he said it. You know, the second half of the Super Bowl, he did not call a good game. He put them in bad situations. And the biggest thing for me when, you know, talking about the Super Bowl, because I know a lot of people will say, well, listen, the players didn't execute. And, you know, it was an overall failure. I mean, like the first wide open touchdown in the flat in the red zone, that one, you might be able to say, well, the players didn't know what they were doing. But the second one, which is an identical look, that's on the coaches to me. I mean, that is as cut and dry as it can be. If you guys didn't adjust to that, if you didn't, you know, figure out what the mistake was and correct it on the sideline, I mean, that's literally like a championship costing type of mistake, you know, to be able to not be able to address that on the fly. So, you know, obviously, you know, it's funny, like Jonathan Gannon isn't very aggressive, and one of those touchdowns came on a zero blitz. But, you know, I think that I really do. I mean, as far as like what I think about him as a coach, I think he has a chance to be a better head coach than he was a coordinator. He's a CEO type, you know, he's a smart guy. There's a reason that a lot of media types really like him. He's very, you know, he's a very good speaker on the podium, and he's got a very clear vision of what he wants the defense to look like, what he wants the team to look like. Doesn't always translate into being good at calling a defense in the game. It doesn't always translate to having, you know, philosophies that align with what your players want or what the fans want. So I think that he might end up being a good head coach in Arizona. I could see it for sure, but I do think that the way that he called the Super Bowl, I mean, it's kind of undeniable that it cost him the game.
EJ, isn't it a little concerning that the Eagles are being very deliberate in terms of finding that next defensive coordinator? Now, we think Denard may have the inside track, but if they decide to go outside of the family to bring one in, I think it's imperative you put that guy in place ASAP. When you have the combine next week and free agency is creeping up on you, you need to get his ideas in terms of what type of players he's looking for to implement his type of scheme on defense. And you look at all these other teams, how quickly they're gobbling up DCs and defensive coaches. And I'm a little surprised the Eagles are being so deliberate with this.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think that it's probably a little bit of like, well, now that Vance is gone, and I mean, I really think they wish that Fangio's contract didn't have the ink dry on it because, you know, the timing of that was tough. You know, he was pretty much gone the day that Gannon got his gig. So, you know, I think they probably were like, we need to take our time and really go through this. But you're right. I mean, at some point, because like this time last year, like Jonathan Gannon, the defensive coordinator of the team, was all like had been to the Senior Bowl and had really gotten into the scouting of all these players and already had an idea of the guys he liked and didn't like. So, you imagine that if you're a defensive backs coach for the Rams or a assistant or the assistant head coach for the Seahawks,
right,
you have your ideas of what you like. You're scouting their players, but you're right. It's a collaborative thing. If Sean Desai gets here or, if any of these candidates get here and they all of a sudden have to build their scheme, that does change the way you evaluate those players. So, yeah, I mean, if we get to the combine and they still haven't hired a guy, I think that would surprise me. Just because, again, like you're right, they got to be those coordinators have to interview players too.
Yeah.
So, I think that their deliberate approach makes sense because they want to, field all these different opinions and field all these different, schemes and everything else. But I do think that at some point, you're right, they got to get moving here.
EJ, what do you think the holdup is on signing Jalen Hurts? Just simply because they knew this day was coming 3 months ago. They saw the way he was playing. They knew that he was going to be the franchise quarterback. The deal really should have been done even before the season was over. Is it the Eagles are waiting, or you think Jalen Hurts in this camp are waiting?
Just like I don't have a whole lot of inside info on this. I just based off of reading between the lines. Like I think the Eagles are incredibly motivated to get this done. Like I asked Howie Roseman about it, and he said, like, we want to keep him in the building. And I really do think that they will get this done. I think, I'm not trying to say that Jalen's the one holding it up, but I think that in the next couple of weeks we'll probably find out, if that's the case. Because I think the Eagles want to have this buttoned up and ready and finished before free agency starts,
Right.
And again, that's me reading between the lines of what Howie said. He talked about how important it is to have that, uncertainty cast aside. Know what your quarterback's making, know what his cap hit is this year, next year, years in the future before you go into free agency and have to start re-signing guys. I don't think it's a coincidence that they didn't re-sign anybody in their regular season. We usually see that, you see them sign guys to extensions. They didn't do that. And I think that going into free agency, if he hasn't signed the deal yet, that's a sign that they might be further apart than we maybe originally expected, because I really do think that you want to have that finished by free agency. So we got like another 3 weeks here. I think that this is really, sometime in the next 3 weeks, I expect to see it done. And again, if it's not, then that's a sign that they might be further apart. But even if they are far apart, let me be clear. Like, I think they're going to get this deal done. The Eagles are motivated to get it done. And the numbers aren't going to be that complicated. If Jalen unless Jalen's coming in and saying he wants fully guaranteed for 7 years or something like that, I think that this is a pretty cut and dry type of negotiation, just because, the recent quarterback numbers, the examples they have, again, there isn't a whole lot up for debate, unless, again, somebody's trying to be outlandish, and whether it's a team lowballing him or Jalen, asking for way more than the market would suggest. But I think they're both pretty sensible sides. And I think, it might just be that these types of things, it's a pretty complex contract to work out. It might just take a little bit of time. But yeah, I like I said, I think that we're probably a couple of weeks away here to really getting some information on where they're at.
EJ, lastly for me, just to circle back to the free agent thing, if you had to guess, if you had to give me two guys who you think would be back of the sort of heavy hitters who were free agents, who would you say it would be?
I would say C.J. Gardner-Johnson, and then I would say Javon Hargrave. I'm less definitive on Hargrave, because I think there's a couple of teams that would really, really pay him. The Chicago Bears are like just sitting there. They need a defensive tackle so bad, and he's the top one on the market. But I mean, it's just they're going to pay $11 million to not have him if he signs somewhere else. I think they're going to have to be aggressive with him. So I would definitely say CJ. If it's not Javon, I could see I even like TJ Edwards is hard, because it's like he's probably going to get paid, and I just don't know if the Eagles are going to pay it. It's also hard because we don't have a defensive coordinator right now, so it's like it's like if they sign if they get a defensive coordinator who really values linebackers, all of a sudden it's like you do need TJ Edwards. But yeah, and I guess like the obvious one's Brandon Graham. Like I think Brandon Graham will be back. I think there's a lot of those guys will be back, but yeah, I think CJ is the one that I'd be surprised that unless he signs like a crazy deal, I'd be surprised if they don't get him back.
You think Sirianni comes back, or he's gone?
I think he's gone. I think that he's worth more to a team. You know how many teams would love to have Isaac Seumalo kind of like bring competency to their offensive line? And the Eagles have contingency plans for him, whether it's Cam Jurgens moves over, whether they draft, we talked about draft needs earlier. Like, what if maybe they draft a tackle, at the back half of the first round, and put him at guard for the first year. I mean, I could see them doing a lot of stuff like that. They just have the infrastructure to kind of replace him. And I do think that he'll get paid a lot because so many teams need, just a rock solid guard. And that's what he is. So, I don't think he'd be back.
Look at Big V. Big V got $50 million for 5 years.
Yeah,
and Seumalo's better than Big V.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. So, I think he's going to get paid. And I don't think the Eagles will be able to keep up with it. So,
all right, EJ, keep up the good work, man. Appreciate you giving us a couple minutes, man. Follow EJ at EJ Smith 94, and of course, Philadelphia Inquirer, Inquirer.com. Thanks, EJ. Take care.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you, man.
All right, always great talking with EJ. Great catch up. Good information there, guys. Let's dig into this a little bit further when we come back. We didn't get to some of the stuff we will get to a little bit earlier, but chief competitors in the NFC for the Eagles this upcoming season. We'll dive into that a little bit. A little later in our NFL segment, we'll do our top 10 AFC power rankings. Aaron Rodgers has left the dark room, so we'll get into that a little bit. The facility, whatever is going on there. We'll get into a bunch
of man, my hand's moving slow.
Exactly. He's hungry.
You seen them chickens?
Hey, man, I got the munchies, dude.
Man. Yeah,
I'm hungry.
We'll dive into all of that. Don't go anywhere. That's D Gunn. That's Barrett Brooks. I'm Rob Ellis. We're Sports Take, JAKIB Sports YouTube Network. We're going to talk right now about Flynn Tree Services. Yes, Flynn Tree Services is an experienced, licensed, and insured Pennsylvania tree services company that will trim or remove any unwanted tree off of your property. And they offer cost-effective solutions to any tree problem that you may face. They're experts at trimming all types of trees, and they serve southeastern Pennsylvania, South Jersey, and northern Delaware. Flynn Tree Services specializes in tree removal, stump grinding, as well as tree pruning. Now, keep in mind, it's a great time to get your trees evaluated before the really sort of last surge of the winter hits. You don't want any branches coming down or trees coming down on your property. That's for sure. Go to their Facebook or Instagram page for a sampling of their work or more information. Give Flynn Tree Services a call at 610-850-2848, 610-850-2848, or online at FlynnTreeServices.com. That's Flynn.